Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Steve Jester with Partnerscapes. We're going to get started. We're right up 2 o'clock. We have 284 folks registered for today, and that's a really good number for this meeting, and really appreciate everyone's interest in Private Lands Partners Day. We are sorry we're not all together in person, but this is the next best thing. I want to start out by thanking our sponsors, the Partners Program, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and USDA-NRCS, great partners for us and for a lot of you all over the country. I just want to go over just a couple of quick ground rules. This is a Zoom webinar, so the only people visible will be those that are a part of the presentations today. Everyone is accessible in the chat. If you do have a question for the panelists, if we have time at the end of the panels, please put those in the Q&A instead of in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. And I believe that is all that I've got as far as ground rules, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our Partnerscapes chairman and Montana rancher, Jim Stone. Jim, take it away.
Hey, Steve, thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Private Lands Partners Day 2021. Who would ever have thunk, right? We'd be at this for 2 years, and you know, we pride ourselves in shaking hands and good conversation and having some good meals together. So we get that really personal touch. And I just want to thank all of you for joining today. My gosh, I'm glad we've all well, I'm not sure we survived the pandemic, but we've made it through, and at least to get to this day. And I'm thanks to all the great presenters, and took the board a little time to decide if this was the right venue, because we do like to meet in person, but we also thought it was really extremely important that we continued this conversation, whether it was a webinar or waiting for another year that possibly meet in person. So again, thank you all for joining in, and look forward to lots of questions. And it's going to be a great couple days. And if you haven't seen, there's a social hour later on, and we'll be having a little bit of fun and some good stories there. So if you can hang in there, we'd love to see you. I do want to thank the great folks in Oregon. I mean, it's been 2 years that they've been just on pins and needles, and they've just been amazing to work with. And our board has just been thankful that those folks continued to answer our phone calls, and we're willing to help put this together. So to Jim Bob Collins, one of our board members and a landowner there, rancher in Oregon. Thanks, Jim Bob, for that. And Cindy Delaney, without you, helping us do these kind of things, ranchers would be in real trouble. And then Callie with Fish and Wildlife Service, always good to see you and hear. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Ron Alvarado with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and we've been great friends for a long time, but he's really stood up to helping us get this done. And really, Ron, just the conservation across the country, you're just an amazing leader, a visionary beyond belief, and we're just honored to have you here today and letting us into your beautiful state via Zoom. But if you'd say a few words, we'd appreciate it, and thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for those kind words. Thank you, Steve, and the staff. Good afternoon and good day to everyone. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our good friends with at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for allowing NRCS to partner with them on this. Thank you, a big thank you to Jim Bob Collins, of course, our local rancher that sits on the board as well. Folks, it's an honor to kick off this year's Private Lands Partner Day event. And as some of you know, as Jim mentioned, it was supposed to be hosted by Oregon in person, but the pandemic had other plans for us. But we have moved on, and we persevered, and here we are today. So regardless, whether together in person or virtually, I know that everyone participating today or this week will have a chance to hear about and see great examples of the way that farmers, ranchers, and foresters are working locally around the country to achieve conservation success. And that is one thing that I love about this organization, and the past conferences that I've attended, is just seeing all the great work out there that you folks do. So congratulations on that success. Look forward to continuing to see that as you guys continue to succeed as an organization. You know, it is a testament to the strength and fortitude of America's working lands that despite all the challenges we have faced recently, and we have faced many with the pandemic, you folks that are dealing with those catastrophic events, fire in the West, drought, conservation remains integral to so many of our lives and our operations. And again, thank you for being a part of that. It's a very special thing, and I don't think we say thank you enough to those of you that are making that happen. As an NRCS employee, as a state conservationist here in Oregon, and as a partner, as one partner in this whole larger partner, I am proud to be a part of this and working, alongside folks like you. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's happening around the country and seeing what's going to be presented throughout this week. And I say this sincerely and without offending other organizations, but this is one of my favorite organizations. And the reason is because it is landowner driven. Of course, the board members are farmers and ranchers and forest landowners, and that's such a special thing because for us agency folks, it helps keep us grounded. I've reached out to many of you for advice, not only for me here in Oregon, but for the agency. And you guys have always been willing to, offer advice and suggestions on how you can make NRCS a better agency, help NRCS help you when it comes to implementing Farm Bill like conservation practices and resources. So again, thank you again. Look forward to in the future seeing you folks in person. And it looks like we will in a couple of years be hosting this in person, which I'm looking forward to, obviously. But next year, look forward to seeing you in person. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ron. Really appreciate those words. And again, to all the folks, I just know it's been a tough year, and we're just glad to have you here today, and look forward to these presentations, and thank everybody for being here. So back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Ron, very much for those comments and for taking the time and for your partnership. The first landscape that we're going to hear from is the east side of Montana, the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, and I would like to introduce Laura, the project leader, Laura Nelson, and let her introduce her co-panelist. And then I believe we've got a video to share after you do that. So Laura, take it away.
Great, thanks, Steve. Again, my name is Laura Nelson. I'm the project leader for the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. And we have Martin Townsend, our coordinating biologist and lands coordinator for Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. And we're gonna go ahead and get started with a video. So go ahead, Cindy.
Something we're missing in our modern American life is connection to the land. Everyone can be connected to the land and where their food comes from and where they can recreate and spend their time and just enjoy being outside.
Look at all the deer that are in these areas, and look at the elk out here. Look at the antelope and sage grouse and everything. We cohabit with them.
Our motto is ranching, conservation, and community, a winning team. And because of the working relationships that the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance has with the conservation community and the ranching community. We have a broad base of diversity and support within our region.
I mean, Leo wakes up every day wanting to make the world better. He's such an innovator. He's always looking for new things to try, new ways to do it.
I feel very hopeful working here because I've worked with a lot of ranchers who are, you know, I mean, they're willing to work with other groups, and that's huge, but also people who are willing to try new technology. They want to learn. I've had ranchers go out and do bird surveys with me in the morning, and you know, they have to get up at 4 in the morning to do that, and they're not obligated to do that, but they just want to learn more about what's on their land.
The average rancher does really care about wildlife on their place, and it's because everything's connected ecologically. That's gonna not only improve their quality of life because they can enjoy it, but also it's gonna make their livestock operation more successful.
We're out here just working our butts off trying to produce a product. And we love living out here. Most people wouldn't want to live here.
We have nearly everything that was here when Lewis and Clark came through, except for the bison are on this property or passed through this property.
Leo's range, our range, this whole country is in better shape than it was when Lewis and Clark recorded what they recorded when they come through here in 1804.
Anything we can do to help these communities thrive and help the management get better and help the landscape stay intact is what we want to be doing.
Okay, are we back to our slides here? Awesome. Okay. I'm gonna take a no news is good news there. Okay, cool. So thanks for sharing that video, Cindy. And we just wanted to share that was actually some extra footage from a project that Martin's going to talk about a little bit later that was filmed out at our board president Leo Barthelmess's ranch in north central Montana, south of Malta in Phillips County. And we just happen to have a lot of footage of our partners and some of the folks that we work with talking about what RSA meant to them. So we wanted to share that. So thanks for letting us open with that. Again, my name is Laura Nelson. I'm our project leader for RSA, and I'm just going to give you a little introduction to who we are, and then I'll hand it over to Martin to talk a little bit more about what it is that we do. So we brought a slideshow presentation with lots of pretty pictures to remind us what this country looks like in good years. So this has certainly been a year in north central Montana that has tested our resilience and tested our positive mental attitude. And so we're excited to remember what this landscape looks like on a good year too. So as Leo said in the video, our motto is Ranching Conservation Communities, a winning team. And this means a lot to us, but primarily it means that when we look that as an organization, we look for win-win-wins. We look for projects and things that we can do in our communities and on our ranches and for the wildlife community that is a win for all three of us. And we're a rancher-led organization. So this is our board of directors. Some of these might be familiar faces to you guys. They're sure familiar faces in our community. They're leaders not just in the ranching community, but in their geographic communities as well. And so that's a really important part of who we are, is that we have this key group of ranchers who bring their on the land knowledge and experience to the table and are always looking for partners that are gonna make, again, those win-win-win scenarios. When we look at what we do, I'm gonna go ahead one slide here and then I'll go back to that. So we have our mission statement, again, Ranching Conservation Communities, a winning team. And then we have this vision statement, and I'm not gonna read that on the screen. You can read that. Those are very carefully chosen words for a reason, and that vision means a lot to us. But if we boiled it down into its very basic essence, it goes to something that Marissa mentioned in that video, and that's quality of life. When our team, our board, our staff, when we all got together a few months ago in Craig and Connie French's garage out on their ranch and talked about, you know, what's our highest calling as an organization? What's the most important thing that we do here? And it boils down to quality of life. And that's a recognition of when we have healthy relationships, when we have healthy collaboration, when we have healthy lands and healthy animals and healthy wildlife populations and healthy people, and we have a quality of life for all of those things involved, then that's the ultimate win. So again, when we just really boil down to what we're striving to do in our organization, it's to improve the quality of life for folks like this. And Martin's going to talk a little bit more now. This is about our conservation committee. So I'll hand it over to Martin to talk about how we do those things.
So like Laura said, my name is Martin Townsend. I am a coordinating wildlife biologist for Pheasants Forever, and my position exists to coordinate the conservation efforts of RSA. So RSA has what we call the Conservation Committee, which is a group within the group that consists of conservation partners that have active interest in working in the area we work in. The Conservation Committee exists for all of those interested partners to work together to find, as Laura said, win-win solutions. To really leverage the ability of that partnership. They said my audio is not good. I hope you can hear me. Really trying to leverage the power of that partnership. Basically make everybody's money go further. Next slide, Laura. So in 2020, almost $200,000 on the ground. So yeah, hopefully it's coming through. In those projects, more than 28 miles of fencing and more than 4,400 acres of native seeding. I'm not sure what I can do about audio at this point. Hopefully it's coming through. I don't have a backup. We can go next slide, Laura.
Yep. Martin, do you want me to pick up, or do you have some headphones or something that might?
Yeah, let me look. I don't know if I have a backup or not. Let me see. I'm not sure what I have.
Okay. Well, Martin would certainly be far more qualified to share these things with you. He's our conservation coordinator, and he works with all of our partners in our conservation committee to get these projects on the ground. But while he's getting that audio fixed up, I'll move ahead, and then he'll be back for Q&A. So one of the really central parts of what RSA does, and where we have gotten to really live that mission out, is in our conservation committee. And I don't know if you could hear what he was saying about the conservation committee has become really the hub of conservation in our region, and it brings together all of these different partners to leverage our missions and our visions and our funding together. So if one group that you see on this slide comes to the table with a project idea that would help a ranch in our region improve their wildlife habitat and their grazing system and be a value to building up a stronger community in our region, then that's a win. And that partner might bring a little chunk of money to say we can get this done, and then another partner says, well, hey, we could help make that fence wildlife friendly, and another partner says, hey, we could help with some water systems that will make that grazing plan work. And so we get to bring all of these different people and perspectives together in this conservation committee. When you take a look at what we've been able to do through those partners, and really, again, we just can't emphasize enough how valuable and how much we appreciate that collaborative effort with these partners, because this is what we're able to do. And you can read those statistics and it's fun. Of course, we count up these numbers and the miles of fencing that we put into more wildlife friendly fencing, and the numbers of acres that we seed back to native grasses and livestock tanks that help improve grazing systems and water pipelines and on and on. But again, when it comes down to it, it comes down to being able to hopefully measure a change in quality of life for all of those things that are involved. I just want to share it. So since our first, the Conservation Committee start in 2017, we've been able to work with 54 family ranches that impact more than 70,000 acres in all of those different efforts. And I'll share just a little story about this family that you see here. This is the Pankratz family. And then maybe Martin can test his audio out and see if he's back online. But this was a really fun project to go out and visit with a year after the on-the-ground conservation project through the Conservation Committee worked with them. Because of their connection with RSA, they were able to put some retired or some old CRP land back into a grazing system, put some water on there so that they could have a grazing system, put up a new wildlife friendly fencing. And because of that, they were able to expand their cow herd enough that each one of these kids got their first heifers, and they get to start building their own herds, these little guys and gal. And they were so excited to take me out to the pasture and show me that's my cow, and that's what I'm going to do. And they're learning from their dad and their mom and their friends and neighbors and our partners about taking care of this land and what it means to be a land steward and a ranch steward at a really young age. And that on-the-ground conservation work is what gave them the ability to expand enough to say, hey, we're comfortable and we're confident that there's going to be a place for our kids to take care of this land for the next generation. And that's the ultimate win for us. Martin?
And Laura's really good at expressing the people side of life. So I guess for a little more information on the conservation side of life, where we work in north central Montana is one of the largest intact grasslands in the world. Our project area spans across, if we could go to the slide with where our projects were located. Our project area spans across Blaine, Phillips, and Valley counties. This is a smattering of where our projects have been located, with songbird population core maps on the top and waterfowl core maps on the bottom. As far as nesting densities, we exist in some of the best sage grouse core habitat in the entire country. We have the longest recorded pronghorn migration that took place from Saskatchewan all the way through Phillips County and south of the Missouri River. So this area has a huge conservation importance, which draws the focus of a lot of those partners to this area. And so having ways that take those programs and projects from those other partners and packaging it in a very ranching focused mentality, forward facing option for producers is something we very much pride ourselves in how our projects go and how accessible they are for people interested in working alongside conservation to achieve their ranching goals. If we go back, we can go through the people involved a little bit. This was a group picture of people that came to the 2021 Montana Range Tour. This is a collection of ranchers that we work with and ranchers that are on our board, as well as individuals from a lot of our conservation partners. So the idea that everyone there is approaching these types of projects with the same goals is a great win-win for conservation and for ranching. And then the ability of our projects to provide funding to the local economy and provide jobs to contractors and vendors and things that make a difference in installing these projects, I think is a huge boon for our community. At the end of this presentation, I'll go through a little bit more on some of the main projects we work on, but our two largest focus areas as far as wildlife focused conservation are grass nesting birds and big game migration. So with that, I will turn it back to Laura for a little more on what RSA does overall.
Thanks, Martin. So these are just some photos of some different projects that give you a little bit idea of who we are and what we do. Soil health tour and fence modifications and water systems. There's a photo of a collared cow there. That's one of the projects. That's what we were filming out at Leo's place for. He's doing some work with the help of our partners with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners Program in experimenting with that technology, which is super fun and a cool thing to be a part of. So we'll use the last little bit of our time to share a little bit about some of the other work that we do. Again, the Conservation Committee is really that's the heart of RSA, to be working on the ground and helping our partners and our ranching community find successes there. But we have a handful of other committees that work really hard to achieve that mission as well. Our Education Workshop Committee works to create rancher focused outreach and education, and we especially like peer-to-peer education. So we want to elevate the voices of our local ranchers and their experiences and be able to share openly, our successes and our failures so that we can all learn together to make our community and our ranches more resilient. Last year, or this year in 2021, we started a rural resilience webinar series and had monthly webinars that for a small nonprofit in North Central Montana expanded to reaching a little over 400 people that came and got to be a part of those webinars, and that really opened our minds to hearing from other folks in different regions about what they do and how that works. And we're partnering with folks like the Ranch Management Consultants and Plank Stewardship Initiative, and Nicole Masters was one of our speakers, and we have another one coming up on restocking after a drought with Shelley Stewart, and we're really excited about that, just to keep our minds forward thinking that, a lot of our ranchers are facing some really challenging decisions right now, but what comes next? And so those are the questions that our Education Committee is working on. Last year we had our first Ranch Stewards book club, and we're opening up our second book club right now, and that's open to anyone, and it's a virtual discussion group where we take a book and just tackle it and talk through some of the ideas, and again, just help each other learn together. So our book this year, or this winter, is Nourishment by Fred Provenza. Our Communication and Outreach Committee is really focused on bringing our ranching stories and talking about how ranchers and these conservation and wildlife organizations work together for our rural communities. And we've gotten a chance to work on several different film projects to bring those stories to life in the last year. I think that we shared some links with the Partnerscapes crew that we'll send you to our YouTube page where you can see those. And so we had the chance to contract with a young man who's a ranch kid from North Central Montana who's building his videography and film business up. And that's another part of a cool thing that our board was really excited to be able to do, to hire young and local talent to tell those stories as well. So we'd love to share those. Our fundraising committee is really committed right now to diversifying our support base for our organization so that we can continue to do this work in the long term. We are so grateful and so thankful for the granting partnerships that we have right now that enables a lot of our conservation work to happen, and the funding from our additional partners who make all of our dreams come true. And we want to be thinking about the future and how do we continue to leverage their investments in our communities and in our ranching community and in the wildlife community to make sure that we're able to do this work for the long haul. So that's what the fundraising committee is focused on. And then our expansion committee, there are so many groups, and many of them are in this room that, us as a young organization look up to and find and gather inspiration from. The Blackfoot Challenge, Jim Stone is one of those groups, but there are many others. And so we've taken those lessons that we're learning from other community-based collaborative organizations and wanting to kind of package them up and hand those things off to other communities and groups. So that's what our expansion committee is focused on, is what can we help other communities replicate, that we're learning and that these other community-based collaboratives are learning, and all of that is connecting right now with our friends to the south, and Win Aces, another really inspiring group that's doing great things out on the landscape. And we work together often to share ideas and share how we can make both of our organizations and our communities stronger. Our newest work is in our Beginning Rancher Committee, and that's a group of folks that are really dedicated to creating opportunities for the next generation of ranch stewards. And they've focused in on this idea of peer-to-peer education and mentorship, and creating opportunities for us to learn together, challenge each other, bring ideas to the table, kick them around, poke holes in them, and make each other stronger for the future. And so we're launching our first Grazers Gathering next week. We're calling it TED Talk. TED Talks just for ranchers and those involved in grazing. So we're really excited to bring some fun speakers and folks together in our community there. And then our last but not least committee, this is the committee that was really a part of RSA's origin story, our Grass Bank Committee. This was the idea that brought Ranchers Stewardship Alliance together clear back in 2003, when a group of ranchers in South Phillips County were facing a drought and some other really challenging issues and challenging times. And they came together and said, gosh, we've got to work together to make sure that we're still here next year and the year after that and next generation and the generation after that. And one of the things that they looked at was this idea of a rancher-led grass bank. And that was 17 years ago. This idea has been kicking around in our organization for a really long time while we've focused on all of these other things. And this one just keeps coming back to say, gosh, this is the thing that we are really passionate about. And it's a tough nut to crack, but we're still working on it. So we've got a great committee together that is keep working through this idea of having a grass bank style grazing property for beginning or transitioning ranchers that have a place to either get started, to express some of their other grazing goals, to have a backup plan in tough years that's cared for under all of the mission and vision and values that our organization holds dear. So that is a really quick run through. I hope you see our time. I lost track of our counter there, but that's RSA, Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, in a nutshell. Steve, did we stick to the time?
Yes.
Good, so I can
Awesome.
Now,
Well, if we have a little bit of time left, I'd actually like to show a couple quick little videos real quick of some conservation work we have going on up here. So hopefully a video came up showing some cows in the background. What I really want to start with this video is the projects that we work on, they're all working ranches, I think is the key takeaway from a lot of the work that we do. For a little bit of background, the first projects that RSA worked on were primarily grassland bird focused, and we were able to address issues like expiring CRP that might be broken up to cultivation and find ways to keep that in grass for the benefit of grass nesting bird habitat through finding ways to make it grazable. So the putting the priority on grazing is a huge focus for the RSA Conservation Committee. Some newer work that we've started doing really since the Department of Interior put out the secretarial order focusing on big game migration has been focused around pronghorn migration. Pronghorn migration, especially pronghorns crossing highways, is a major issue across the West. We have a project ongoing now with the help of the BLM and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, where we're looking at fences near roadways and how we can improve those for migration efforts of pronghorn. So as you can see in the back of this video, over here by the power lines is a highway, and this is the fence along a highway that will be removed and replaced as part of a project. Beforehand though, there's a line of trail cameras set up along it, trying to capture how it's being used for migration and how it will be different afterwards. So we've seen some neat things on it. With the fence beforehand, it's not completely set up for pronghorn migration. They primarily cross under the fence, and with a higher bottom wire, it's not completely passable, although it is passable at this point. In the future, the bottom wire of this fence is going to be raised up to hopefully try to limit the amount of time antelope spend second guessing whether they can get through it or not. This is crucial in videos like this, where they're spending a lot of time out basically on the highway of trying to let them find ways to get through and under. This makes a huge difference when there's actually traffic on the road. We see here, one's gonna come flying through that he didn't hesitate, but he got hung up a little bit. So this work, I'm super excited about. I think it's gonna be neat to show after we make these changes, just the change in that hesitation. So hopefully we don't have animals hanging out on a highway longer than they need to be. But then some of the neater things that are coming up through this is seeing the human interaction of it. This is properties enrolled in a Fish, Wildlife, and Parks access program, and we can see a hunter here that thinks he's going to get an antelope, and then just to make me feel better, here's the same hunter 12 minutes later coming back without an antelope. So I think that's some of the neater work we're doing. I think that would wrap up my conservation committee side of this presentation, and we could go back for some questions on RSA.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Martin. And thank you, Laura. That was awesome. Awesome work you guys are doing. A number of positive comments in the chat. We do have one question from an anonymous attendee. What are the first steps an individual group should take if they wanted to collaborate with RSA on starting a similar initiative on their landscape?
Great question. Just reach out to us. A lot of times that's my role, as I'm kind of the filter through and then send projects to the right committees or the right people in our team. So if you're interested in doing that, again, like that's why our expansion committee exists, is because we are, again, we're so grateful that other groups and other community-based collaboratives took the time to send us like employee manuals and hiring, like all of these things that go in the background of running a nonprofit organization, which was the scariest part of what we do as we grew. I mean, we went from having our first paid employee, like 4 years ago, Martin, and it was like part-time, and to now all of a sudden we have Martin full-time and then 3 other of us part-time in the office. And so there's just a lot of background of growing a nonprofit organization that we leaned really heavily on other organizations like ours to kind of hold our hands and help us through. And so we want to do the same for other organizations that want to do that too. So again, like we'd love to share. We're kind of open source. If we have an idea, we want to share it so that you can make it happen in your community too.
And then that's the nonprofit side of it. I think from the conservation side of it, you got to start identifying those partners that might exist in that area and trying to build relationships with those individuals. And then better yet, try to find ways that you guys can find wins together. I think that's how we keep a lot of the agencies and groups interested in what we do, is we have things that they can do and do well, that they can help us with, that helps them as well.
Awesome.
Excellent presentation.
Yes, thank you both. Just a reminder, folks, we do have a program of sorts. It's been posted in the chat. It was sent to you on a link and Dropbox. Hopefully you've got a way to get a hold of it. It does have the contact information for Laura and Martin and all our panelists, as well as some information that they provided that will be a little bit more helpful if you're interested. So really want to thank you again, RSA, Martin and Laura. Appreciate you sharing your story, and we can't hear everybody's applause, but you can hear Jim and mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and yeah, for being a place to share these stories, because we've got a lot to learn and we're excited to be here. So thanks.
Well, and folks have got a lot to learn from you too as well. Thank you.
Thanks for being a good neighbor to the east, guys.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. Well, next up, we've got, we're going to hear from the Sandhills Task Force from the Sandhills of Nebraska. I'm about to kick it over to Shelley Kelly, Executive Director also of the Sandhills Task Force, also a Partnerscapes board member, rancher, land manager in the Sandhills, and stays very, very busy. And I appreciate her and her panelists being able to jump on here. Shelley, you want to introduce yourself and your panelists, and then we can go to a video I think you got for us?
You bet. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm Shelley Kelly. I've been the executive director for the Sandhills Task Force for a little over 7 years now. Also a rancher, and I get to be a board member for Partnerscapes, which is pretty darn neat. And then today I have Homer Buell with me as well, who's a rancher and a board member for the Sandhills Task Force. Homer, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell about your operation, then we can go to the video.
Okay, I'm a fourth generation land steward rancher in the north central part of the state, which is part of the Nebraska Sandhills, which a lot of you I'm assuming don't know, but almost a third of our state, 20,000 square miles, and a very unique, resilient area, but a great place to raise cattle and all different types of livestock. So my son, fifth generation, is back on the ranch, and we really like that. Shelley, do you want me to talk a little bit later after the video, a few other things in regards to the task force? I can do that.
Yeah, we'll show the video, and it's going to be brand new to Homer as well. We're excited to see it, and excited for Fish and Wildlife Service and Partnerscapes for making this video happen. And then we'll reconvene and talk a little bit more.
I grew up in the Sandhills, and I always enjoyed cattle and grass and ranching. I have sand, not just in my boots, but also in my soul.
What's it smell like?
It's
Flower?
something that I hope that I always get to make my life. My son will be the fourth generation that'll be hopefully in agriculture.
I'm a fifth generation rancher here in the Sandhills. One thing that's been instilled in me from a very young age is that it's just our land for a short period of time, and we need to take care of it. We need to make it better for the next generation.
We have 3 daughters, and we've been in the cow business since they were little. The Sandhills are actually, a highly productive grass area that has an amazing amount of wildlife, things like that. But our goal in this whole deal is to try to make it viable for everybody to have a piece.
From the fish and wildlife standpoint, the Sandhills are very unique. It's the largest stabilized sand dunes in the Western Hemisphere, and it's one of the few places where we have the Ogallala Aquifer as surface water, which creates a unique dynamic with wet meadow and wetland habitat, mixed in with grassland habitat. And so it's the second most important nesting ground for migratory birds in the country outside of the prairie pothole region. And it's a central stronghold for our greater prairie chicken population.
Originally, there was a lot of prairie chickens on our place. My wife's grandfather actually started this place, and he would actually go out and there'd be chickens get up on his arm and sit, but as things evolved, we started noticing there was less and less chickens. We're trying to maintain the plains, and one of our problems was the cedar tree invasion. We were losing grass, and by the time we realized we had a problem, we figured out we couldn't take care of it ourselves, and so we were looking for answers.
Eastern red cedar is probably the #1 threat that we have on our rangelands. Planting trees is something that's been promoted ever since settlement times. But what they never accounted for was that tree taking over the rangeland, not staying in their neat little rows. And once they get out into the landscape, our seed source starts coming out farther into the landscape, and we've got huge problems.
Our focus species is the greater prairie chickens in the Sandhills, and there's research out there that shows that if you have a prairie that has as much as 4% encroachment of brush or trees, they stop using that landscape.
And because we don't have near the wildfire that we used to, these trees are spreading uncontrolled.
We want to do good things for grassland birds. At the same time, landowners want production for their cattle. You know, we have the same end goal of we want the trees gone. The reasoning for why we want it is just slightly different.
You can collaborate to help landowners and to help the resource and to just make it a win-win for everybody.
And if we've got the resources to do it and we can collaborate to do it, I think we need to.
I think a lot of people in the Sandhills distrust the government because miscommunication and misunderstanding in the past. That's where we can bridge the gap between those two groups.
And there was some really forward-thinking people with the Nebraska Cattlemen and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program that they decided to sit down and talk about those issues. And what they realized after discussing is many of their goals were the same. They were just stated differently. And so the Sandhills Task Force was formed.
I think most ranchers realize that these projects are going to be hugely beneficial, but it's hard to justify the expense. It makes it a lot easier when you have partners.
And so the Sandhills Task Force started raising funds to be able to fund conservation projects.
It's a landowner-based, rancher-run organization, but has already built in the partners. The partners are all there at the meetings, so the alliances are already made.
One of the nice things about them being landowner-led is that they've built a reputation of trust amongst the landowners here in the Sandhills, and that makes a huge difference in us being successful in accomplishing our goals and missions within the Partners Program of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
When we started our search for help in this tree removal program, you know, I was fairly skeptical of the government agencies. But the Sandhills Task Force has changed my view and maybe made me look at more working with the other agencies instead of considering them a complication.
So Nebraska is primarily privately owned, so it's critical that we work with private landowners or we're not going to have the impact that we want. And so, the Nebraska Game and Parks, we've been involved and supportive of the Sandhills Task Force since the early 90s, from when it was started. The more assistance we get, the more we work together, ultimately the more impact we're going to have.
We partnered with the Sandhills Task Force, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Nebraska Game and Parks, and put in some fences and new watering sites. Gives your grass a chance to rest, develop a better root system, and so it comes back stronger year after year after year. The biggest benefit for us is we can run more cows up there because there's more grass.
We're able to get water to more places in the pasture and spread the cows out. And then we started to cross fence to utilize the water and the grass more efficiently. We cleared some big stands. We even took out a few shelter belts that weren't being used anymore productively. And so as we made it more beneficial for the cows, then we made a healthier ecosystem for the wildlife. We've seen the chickens multiply back, I would say halfway back, and it's a good gain. So I'm getting the benefit as a producer, but the other agencies are getting a benefit of better prairie chicken habitat.
Thankfully, we are focusing on voluntary conservation, so there's not mandates that come down and push regulations onto landowners.
We want to keep species from being listed, and so it's important that we can kind of maintain the quality of the grasslands that we need in this part of the world.
I think landowner-led nonprofit organizations like the Sandhills Task Force have a place in different landscapes across the country.
It gives you a sense of security with the government people that it's still controlled by the landowners.
If people can come together and communicate and build those relationships, anything is possible. If you can find a common ground and continue that communication and that relationship building, it's pretty easy to do. I enjoy working with ranchers. They're a great group of people. We always find a way to come together and work together. We have a common goal.
You know, it's a strong independent group that wants to keep their way of life. If we can keep the Sandhills intact, that's a big step to doing that.
All right. Well, the video almost gives me a tear to my eye because they did a good job putting together and kind of capturing the Sandhills region and some of our rancher board members and our great partners. That's just a few of our partners that got featured in there, and we're blessed to have great partnership in the Sandhills and throughout Nebraska as a whole. Really, we've got a culture of collaboration here, and I didn't appreciate that near as much. I kind of took it for granted until I started going to these other states with Private Lands Partners Day. And so I really appreciate how Partnerscapes has given us the ability to see how other states work together and tackle issues, because we have been able to bring things home. But a couple of things that I'd like to highlight about the Sandhills Task Force. It's really kind of amazing how similar we are to the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and some of the different things that we have going on. And then we differ a little bit because our landscapes are a little bit different too. But we have a staff of 4 right now, and we get to help landowners across the Sandhills, which takes up about 1/3 of Nebraska. And we get to help ranchers on a technical level as well as a financial level. So sometimes ranchers don't need any funds, they just need some advice on how to get things done. And we're more than happy to help with that. And our types of projects that we get to do are the eastern red cedar removal, the wetland work, working on landscapes that look like what's in my background here. And then we get to do some lake renovations and grazing projects just to improve grazing management on the grassland. We have held conservation. We do hold conservation easements. We haven't been so active in that right now because there's another organization in Nebraska that's taken that on a little bit more. But we're really working on trying to promote conservation and build the cultural will to start attacking these cedar trees that are plaguing our intact grassland. And we've been doing it through meetings and through brochures and just information in general for a lot of years. But here lately, we've been trying to work into maybe some billboards and trying to do things kind of like that. We're bringing a cartoon character in to help tell the story about eastern red cedar and why intact native prairies are important. We just keep working. Prescribed burning is a relatively new practice in the Sandhills, so we're still trying to get individuals sold on that. And we are working on the prescribed burning front by providing the technical assistance as well as the financial assistance, and working with volunteer fire departments to get them interested in helping out, and just helping in general. You can plan nap time as close as you want, but sometimes it just doesn't work. I'm gonna have to take my background off so you can see them a little bit better, but my helper's here today too. And then the big thing to highlight is our efforts to try to be preventative versus remedial in our efforts to keep our species intact. We are blessed here in the Sandhills to not have too many species that are listed federally, but we do have a few, and all of our work gets to benefit those. So we're not in competition, which is good. But I'm going to turn it over to Homer, and the only thing I hadn't talked about yet was the Sandhills Stewards program, Homer, and you can share about your take on the Sandhills Task Force and why you've been so involved for as long as you have.
Okay, will do. I won't have as good a helper as you have there, Shelley, but no, my, being involved with the Sandhills Task Force goes back to early 2005. We did a project with them. We wanted to increase some pheasant population along the Calamus River, which runs through the ranch, and the task force was really good for us to work with on that project. But then it would have been about 2010 is when I went on the board of the Sandhills Task Force and have been more directly involved since then. Although we have continued to do some projects since then, mostly centered around eastern red cedar removal, which Shelley's talked about have been a big thing with our projects, especially in recent years. I wanted to emphasize 3 or 4 different things. And I know in all the presentations today, they're going to talk about partnerships because that's extremely important. But as Shelley mentioned earlier, and I think and said within the video, how important that has been, those partnerships with the NGOs and the agencies, as well as the private landowners, to make good things happen within the Nebraska Sandhills. As part of our mission statement, one of the things in there is profitable ranching. And I think keeping that in mind has been important for our task force too. That all the things that we do, in the end, we want to keep those private landowners on the land doing what they know how to do best. And so that's always been the utmost in our thought process as we devise our projects and do what we do. Although Leopold, when he defined conservation, he said it has to be good, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here, but it has to be good for the land and the landowner. And I think those of us on the task force, as well as Shelley and employees preceding her, always kept that in mind. It needs to be good for the land, but it needs to be good for that landowner in the end, profitable. So that's been important. And then I think the last thing that's really helped us as people, and Shelley mentioned some of our staff people that we have now with her and Ashley and Lisa, who just come on to do some work for us. But they've all been important, as well as people on the board, to make things happen. And that's what you have, the right kind of people in place to, in the end, reach the goals that you want to reach. We did, like Shelley just mentioned, started a ranch stewardship program. Ty Walker leads that up. And that's doing what we can with Ty, doing what he can, meetings and different relationship building within Sandhills ranchers that goes through maybe, the financial side, the environmental side, managing, everything that's out there with the land, the wildlife, the people, but just trying to help develop all of us ranchers. And we all need a little more of that to become better business managers, become better managers of all the various natural and not natural resources that we take care of. So Ty's, we've just started that program. We've had some good funders for that. Ty is doing an excellent job to start with, and we hope and expect to see that program continue to grow. So with that, hopefully we've got a few questions. If you have anything more that you wanted to add, Shelley.
Well, I just thought I would share, we have a website that we keep going. It's just sandhillstaskforce.org, and you can kind of keep up with what we're doing there. And I'm so intrigued by the book club that RSA is doing and all their outreach and stuff. And so I look forward to getting engaged with some of that, because I think as organizations, as rancher-led organizations, we can learn from each other and help improve our landscapes. And I think that that's something that we can really do across the countryside. Is every state has some unique area. And if you can get a rancher-led or a landowner-led organization together to help promote conservation in that area and build some of those partnerships and those relationships, it really does help the landowners, the working landscape, as well as the wildlife species that make their home there too. But we could entertain any questions. I guess I haven't seen any questions that we have. Maybe we've been really complete.
I don't see one yet, Shelley, but I've got one to give us see if we get some more. But with all the changes in our wider world over the last 18 months and the turmoil in commodity markets and everything else, and is it hard to keep people interested in being a part of the task force and moving forward with that part of it with everything else going on?
That's a great question. You know, COVID impacted all of us, but we saw maybe some hesitation at first, you know, people not wanting to get together and talk about projects too much just because they wanted to have a little bit of distance. But then after, you know, we kind of realized that we're meeting out in the pasture a lot of times, and these conservation issues aren't waiting for a pandemic, and they're not going to put themselves on hold. We've seen our business kind of just go back to normal, if normal is even a word we get to use anymore. Sometimes it takes more vehicles because some of our partners have some restrictions that they're working through. And the biggest thing that I think that is impacting our organization, and I think even organizations like Partnerscapes, is the inability to meet people in person as much as we used to. Building partnerships is one of the biggest reasons that we've been successful. And it's tough to build partnerships when you're not able to see people. I wish we could see everybody that's on this video and have those conversations that we get to have. But the next best thing is to get together virtually. And it takes almost a little bit more discipline for us to sit in front of our computer screens and do this. But I think it's very important. So finding a way to maintain partnerships and build new partnerships in this world where we do a lot more virtual communication, I think is one of our biggest challenges right now. And it's one that has me concerned, because for the first year, you can just kind of ride off of the coattails of what you had built. And now we're getting to a place where there's been some turnover. It's been a lot of time. And so we've got to try to find a way to connect with each other a little bit better and try to work through this. But that's kind of my take. Homer might have another take on it too.
No, I think having with Shelley and Ashley, two excellent employees that have, you know, we don't reach out and talk and try to pull in projects. We let them come to us, but they have been so good to work with people. And I think, and they've built the relationships between them and the agencies and the NGOs, and all that has helped us. To me, we've worked through this almost seamlessly. There's been a few hiccups and a little slowdown, but not much at all.
There was, you may have hit this in your answer already, Shelley. There was one more question from the chat from Natalie Sexton with the Fish and Wildlife Service. What has been a challenge your task force has faced, and how have you overcome that challenge? If you've got something to add to what you already talked about.
Sure. Yeah, a challenge that we've had to overcome, you know, is kind of the biggest challenge that is forefront in my mind. And even, you know, TJ Walker, I see he's commented, and Kenny Dinan were on. We were just on a call talking about Eastern Red Cedar. This Eastern Red Cedar encroachment has just been something that is probably the biggest threat to the Sandhills right now. And we haven't overcame it yet. We're waging a war, and it really is war. I'm not sure we're quite winning yet, but boy, we're working hard at it. We've got a lot of passion and a lot of commitment from organizations, and we're building that cultural will and that understanding that how bad these trees are. We're in a prairie landscape, and the wind blows here and it gets darn cold. And when you were coming to claim this land, when the settlers first arrived, you had to plant trees. So we've promoted planting trees for generations, and now we've flipped the script and we're trying to talk to people about controlling their trees and not letting them take over, and that not all trees are good. And so it is kind of a paradigm shift. The conservation community has, you know, changed their story on it. And so it's something that we're working really hard to try to get people to understand these cedar trees are going to take over their ranch and cause bigger issues like wildfires that we can't control if we don't take after them soon. And so that's our biggest challenge. I can't say that we've overcame it, completely, but we've got some tools in place and we're constantly working on it.
Yeah, we had Salem Saloom in the Q&A asking about prescribed fire, and I know you talked a little bit about that just now, but I know that with Partner Bob and his Western counterpart on the way, hopefully that'll become a part of your toolbox that'll be more deployable for you in the future.
Yeah,
Shelley.
prescribed burning really has taken off here in the Sandhills. I can remember when I started with the Sandhills Task Force, I was a couple years in, so probably about 5 years ago, I went to the board and I told them that we had an extremely successful prescribed burn season because we had 5 prescribed burns in the Sandhills. And this last year, I'm happy to report that there was at least 3 days where I could look across the skyline and there were at least 3 or 4 plumes of smoke in the air in the Sandhills. And I wasn't on one of those burns. And so we have really increased our capacity. There are groups that are acting on their own and aren't needing a lot of support. And then there's new groups that are needing support. And we've partnered with other organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service and others to get more technical capacity out there to help make sure that we have safe and effective prescribed burns, because it is in most areas, it's the most economical tool we have to controlling cedar. Mechanical clearing still works really well in some areas, but if those trees are seed bearing, we're going to have to follow up with some kind of treatment anyways.
I might just add, Steve, we've done 2 burns on the ranch. I've got a 3rd one set up, and they weren't big burns, and we were very lightly infested, but so we could do most of it mechanically. But I mean, it's a great tool. In this area I live in the eastern Sandhills, you see more and more burning every year, and we're moving in a good direction with that.
Jim, I think you had a question. That's we got time for one more.
Shelley Homer, awesome presentation. What are you guys thinking about carbon and that whole market? Looking at your grasslands, my goodness, that's you guys are a huge storage system there.
Well, Manuel, whether Shelley, I've actually talked to some people in Texas. I've been to a couple presentations about, carbon sequestration, carbon markets, and the whole ecosystem services, how you can get paid in some way, maybe benefit from that. To me, it's pretty fuzzy because you take so many of our ranch, a lot of ranches have tried to do the right thing for the last, 40, 50 years. And how does it determine how you should be paid for what you've done in the past versus somebody who maybe hasn't had the best practices and make changes? So determining, how you're paid through those markets seems to me to be a challenge. It's something that needs to be continued to work through. I think there's some possibilities there, but I am one to say set back and see how it develops. And I for certainly need to learn more and more about it.
Awesome.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just chime in a little bit. I share some of the same concerns. We've done a really good job of conserving the Sandhills and getting it in really great shape right now. And we do sequester carbon in the area, but it's not a high amount. We are in a semi-arid landscape and we have sandy soils. And so what I'm afraid of is when they do some of the studies and they see how much carbon is stored year after year, we're not going to look very competitive as compared to some of the cropping systems in the heavier textured soil areas. And I really hope that the people that are developing these programs pay good attention to what they are doing, because some unintended consequences that I would be afraid of would be conversion so that it can go back to grassland for a payment, or it would be something like letting eastern red cedar encroachment go so that you could get paid to take care of it, or just a regression in management in some level. Now, a lot of people are very committed to the landscape and to their stewardship level, but some people might take advantage of a situation if it was made available. And then there has to be some way to reward people for past stewardship levels and stewardship levels that they maintain. And so the ecosystem services part of it, I'm encouraged about that because I think that there's a lot of good things that we do, especially in the Sandhills region, that benefits water, quantity and quality, biodiversity, all the native plants that we have out here, and then overall stewardship levels for birds and the populations and habitat. And so there's some good things that we can do that way, but I do have some concerns, and I just hope that we don't cause problems with some of the good work we're trying to do out there.
Yeah, I think those questions are vexing a lot of people that are working on ecosystem services and on grasslands particularly. Well, Homer and Shelley, thank you. Conley too. Thank you guys so much for sharing some time with us today and sharing part of the Sandhills Task Force story. Everybody, there's some additional information and links in the program materials. So, and we'll have this video up on our YouTube page and up on the Sandhills Task Force page very soon, so you can watch it again. I forgot to mention this was its premiere. So, and we will get Shelley's last name fixed on the intro. We didn't notice that till the last minute, but we're working on it. So, thank you both. Hope you can stick around. We're going to go to move directly to our next panel. If Derek, if you're ready out there in Zoom Landia,
Here.
All right. Derek with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Iowa, going to move a little bit to the east. If you want to introduce your panel or take off with your presentation, however you've got it set up, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right. Can you guys see the presentation all right? A little head nod. Perfect. Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate everyone tuning in. Excited to talk a little bit about our partnership here in Iowa. And we're going to kick off with just a quick intro on our panelists. So I'm Derek Weisenflue with Fish and Wildlife Biologist. I'm a Fish and Wildlife Biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, stationed in Iowa. And with me, I've got Brandon Knittings, who's our Field Service Program Manager with the Iowa Soybean Association. And I've also got Karen Wilkie, who's an Iowa Freshwater Specialist and Boone River Project Director with the Nature Conservancy. And then our special guest is Camille Rogers, who is a landowner with an Oxbow that was recently restored, and she's willing to share her story with everyone. So we're super excited to get her perspective as well. So I just thought we'd just start off, in case folks don't know, we're moving further east here in the presentations. So we're going to talk about Oxbow restorations here in Iowa. And just to kind of orient folks to the discussion here, we're going to focus on, a little bit of background on Iowa, talk briefly about Oxbows, what they are, and really talk about our partnership, what brought us together, and some of these other partnerships that are forming because of the effort that's really only strengthened over the last 30 years or so. Why and how we're restoring Oxbows. And then we're really going to jump into the meat, which is Camille and Karen kind of sharing the story of her Oxbow restoration and what that looks like. And then we're kind of come back big picture to the history of restorations of Oxbows in Iowa, talk a little bit of our successes as well as some of our challenges and really what the future looks like. We're excited. There's been a lot of emphasis on Oxbow restoration here in Iowa and actually quite a bit beyond in other states as well. And we think this has quite a bit of application to pretty much the entire country. And so we're excited to share some of the tools we've developed. And then we'll just kind of end with a quick closing from there and questions. So I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Yeah, so this is basically what Iowa looks like for those of you not familiar. We're just rolling hills of crop ground, some trees. So 78% of Iowa is actually crop ground now. That's a land use map. So you can see the browns, all the crop fields. You get a little bit more pasture to the south central, But like I said, mainly crop. 97% of Iowa is private land. So yeah, you'll have the farmers, big farm operations, harvesting corn, soybean right now, actually. It used to be, Iowa used to be mainly prairie. It was like 80% prairie with 11% of wetlands mixed in. So big changes over the years. Now it's a really productive agricultural state, but it has had some negative impacts on water quality, wildlife habitat, as well as the way water moves across this landscape. So the picture that just popped up down in the bottom left corner is from the 1930s. So meandering stream, prairie stream, just like you would see all across Iowa back then. And then 20 years later, they straightened it. So actually that meander is what this project is all about, is going in and restoring those old stream beds.
And so just to give folks an idea of the prevalence of oxbows on the landscape, those former channels, this is just a couple mile long reach of a river in Iowa. And all the red that you can see is essentially the old river meanders. This is a flood risk map, so it shows that entire bottom, everything but that upper right corner would be underwater during different flood events. And again, this is somewhat because of manipulation, straightening of the stream in this case as well, but also just the natural variation of rivers and how they shift and change and evolve, which creates these oxbows throughout the landscape. This is a National Wetlands Inventory map, again, just kind of showing that same oxbow and how they look as wetlands. They are a very prominent feature in Iowa's landscapes. We've got over 40,000 acres of oxbows and overflow wetlands in Iowa. Unfortunately, however, many of those are extremely degraded and are no longer functioning, which is why we get involved from a restoration perspective.
Here's a nice visualization of how oxbows can be formed naturally. And so you can see this photo from the 1943 and then evolving to 1995, 2004, and then 2006. And so this is one example of how oxbows can be formed naturally. However, like Brandon showed too, a lot of our streams were straightened and altered to make way for farming. And so that's a whole nother set of oxbows that could use a little TLC.
I'll just add in here, this oxbow is from Texas. And so again, there's not a state in the country that doesn't have oxbows. And certainly there are states with far more oxbows than Iowa. But we're going to get to some of the exciting reasons why this is such a good multi-purpose practice here in a minute. But I thought we should start off with what kind of brought us together. And in this case, of course, the reason I'm involved and actually everyone on this panel is involved is because of a little fish called the Topeka Shiner, which was a prairie stream fish that really relies on oxbow habitats, these off-channel wetlands and pools to fulfill its life history, to reproduce. And we've unfortunately lost much of their habitat throughout the range, which would be essentially the whole western half of Iowa, as you can see in the map on the left. And it would go into many other states as well, so it covers 6 states. And in Iowa, it's down to just those little red areas, essentially three watersheds that we focus pretty much all our work on from a Topeka Shiner perspective. But of course, oxbows on the landscape are much broader than that. And, you know, fish brought us together, but we do a lot of these are very good projects for other wildlife as well, migratory birds, amphibians, but certainly for the landowners as well. And that's what we're excited to have Camille share her story. Some folks recreate in them. Some folks, you know, are really interested in the water quality aspects. So we're going to kind of dive into that and why these are popular beyond just the fish perspective. So just to kind of tee up why we're doing this, again, I mentioned we're seeing many of our oxbows in Iowa fairly degraded. That degradation comes from sedimentation. It could come from, you know, conversion. In some cases, the crop fields, it could come from a tiling and different impacts as well. And so, you know, of course, what you get on occasion is you get dying fish when they don't have the same hydrology and hydraulics that they used to have. So this Oxbow, this little off-channel wetland has filled in with sediment. Normally this would be quite a bit deeper and would connect to the groundwater, and that's not the case. And so the other big thing at play on the landscape, and this is much broader than Iowa and impacts a big part of the country, is nutrient transport. And as you can see from this is a nitrogen yields map. Obviously, Iowa has a significant contribution of nitrogen to the landscape through farming and other processes at play. And that's obviously leading to the hypoxia zone down in the Gulf Coast. And so it's really exciting. These Oxbows will actually help us address some of the nitrogen issues. And we're going to talk about that. And so here's, this is an image from Minnesota of Oxbow restorations. To restore these, you can see that they hold a lot more water. They're adjacent to the streams. So they're essentially helping collect that water, take out the nutrients before it enters the stream. These are also incredible fish nurseries. There's a number of landowners we've worked with that actually will fish in these, and they'll catch a lot of sunfish, get pike, a lot of game fish, crappie, but they're also our nursery for shiners and many of the minnows as people refer to them, and all the other little fish that occupy these streams as well. And so they're incredibly important for that riverine ecosystem as well. And I mentioned water quality. So through water quality monitoring that we're going to get into, we actually know that these Oxbows as a wetland help reduce nitrogen, for example, fairly significantly. And the real additional added benefit is they work fantastic in working lands. So cattle grazing, completely acceptable, very common in Iowa, especially in certain watersheds. And it's a very well-fit practice for the landscape, partly because this edge of field is not often cropped. Sometimes they are, but it's mostly edge of field, and we can, maximize the productivity of these floodplain areas that otherwise, may not be maximized.
So the restoration process can be very simple. As Derek mentioned, most of these have just filled in with excess sediment over the years. And so the restoration process is simply to remove that excess sediment and make sure that conservation practices are set in place so that that sediment doesn't get back into the Oxbow. As we do this restoration, it allows the floodplain to naturally be connected back to the creek, allows fish and excess floodwaters to enter the restoration. And as Derek mentioned, is just really great for these Topeka Shiners. Obviously, every restoration looks different. Sometimes you just need to remove trees. Sometimes you just need to maybe make a little connection, such as in my picture, you can see in the background, a nice little connection to the Oxbow. However, most of these are on private property, and we do need 100% funding to convince landowners to do these restorations, because there's not much of an agronomic or economic benefit for landowners. And so luckily, with these partnerships, we have a lot of people to provide the technical and financial assistance that's needed to get them in place. So we'll move into the geography that Camille, her Oxbow is in. It's called the Boone River Watershed in north central Iowa, as shown on the map here. The partners shown here have been working in this watershed for over 20 years. The watershed is about 500,000 acres. As Brandon said, it's pretty standard, 85% ag, very flat, tile drained. And so our first step was just to map all of the Oxbows that were potential restorations. And those are the red stars there. We've got over 400 potential sites. Just shows the great opportunities for restoration, but the real need to prioritize which sites we start with. And so that's where Camille came in. Her site, is in Topeka Shiner range, and it has a lot of really great characteristics for restoration. And so I reached out to Camille. Hers is circled there in that yellow circle. And when I reached out to her, I was met with so much enthusiasm and excitement about the possibility of restoration. Every landowner, I would say, chooses to restore for different reasons, and a great majority of them choose to not restore. But Camille had a true passion for nature, land, and wildlife. Go ahead with the next slide, Derek, or the next picture. So there's a picture of, or an aerial photo of Camille's Oxbow, shown 1930s when it was a part of the stream, compared to current aerial photos where the stream has been altered. So let's see. Now I think I'll hand it over to Camille to share a little bit about the history of her farm and what that looked like before restoration.
Thank you, Karen. I'm honored to be here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history of this area. In 1850, there was a 3,000-acre forest along the Boone River, just a mile or two from this farm. It was used as camping and hunting grounds for the Sioux, Sauk, Fox tribes. Settlers began moving into the area in the 1850s. And that's just 80 years before that picture that you showed previously was taken. Some of the Native Americans remained and played an important part in building this community. But the nearby town wasn't established for another 30 years. In this picture, the white house that's in the center, that's the old farmhouse that I grew up in. And part of that used to be a stagecoach stop. And then over where the bins are, there was a blacksmith shop, and the highway was the stagecoach road. This land was first purchased as a farm in 1862. And I think we were the third family to live here. My parents bought it in 1954. In this picture, and you can see in the 2/3 up, that's the Oxbow. It was separated from the creek at that time. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit. But the Oxbow site has solely been a pasture. There's a pond at certain times of the year, but it's becoming more shallow as it's filled with sediment, and frequently was dry. Dad usually grazed about 30 head of cattle. In more recent years, such as when this picture was taken, our neighbor used it for his elk herd and horses, and there's a few long herd cattle in there too that he was grazing. There's a wide variety of wildlife. All of the critters we learned about in the life cycle and in science class have lived back in that area. This shot shows the very first part of the restoration project with Karen and two of the contractors doing the measurements in preparation.
Camille, I want you to talk a little bit about why you chose to restore when I contacted you.
Sure. I've always loved this farm. I've many wonderful memories of growing up here, but there's three in particular that I wanted to share. As a young child, I often would bring a book and an apple and my cat and come down in this pasture, and it was just a special time of connection to the land and really feeling grounded. And it was a very important part of my childhood. The second event, I was about 12, and we had a 6-week section of conservation in science class. We took field trips. We learned about terracing and erosion control, about wetlands. And I was so excited to come home from school and tell my parents what I'd learned. I was passionate about it back then. One day, the topic was crop rotation, and I was telling my dad about this, and he shared with me that his maternal great-grandfather worked side by side with Henry Wallace to help develop some modern farming techniques, including crop rotation and working with seed development. Dad was so proud that he came from people that left a legacy for all farmers. And it's what inspired him to be a farmer. And third, when I was a teenager, I helped my dad plant apple trees. it wasn't often that I got to spend time working at Dad's side because I had 3 brothers. This day we had a deep conversation. I've remembered it all of these years. Dad said a lot of farmers get it wrong. They think we own the land, but I don't think that's right. I believe the land is a gift that's been given to us, and it's our responsibility to nurture and care for it as good stewards and improve it as a legacy for the generations to come. So those events and watching my parents make decisions, always with stewardship in mind, made a lifelong impact. And it became even more poignant when my dad passed away when I was 21. So a decade ago, my mother became ill and needed a companion. So I came to stay with her 24/7. That she called me her seeing eye kid. But my stay ended up being almost 8 years. And during that time, it gave me an opportunity to rekindle my passion for this land. So when Karen contacted me about the Oxbow restoration, her call was perfect timing. My life was falling apart at the time. Mom passed away. My brother passed away in 2018 and 19. And my husband was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, PSP, and myasthenia gravis, most likely from his Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam. And Karen, I don't think I ever told you this, but your sweet voice and enthusiasm about the Oxbow restoration here, well, my gut reaction was to say an immediate yes, because you gave me a gift of hope. But I wasn't sure if I could handle one more thing. My plate was so full. But my sweet husband, who knew me so well, encouraged me to pursue it because he knew I would need something to look forward to that would help me heal from his death. And he was right. I think we can go on to the next slides.
Thank you for sharing that, Camille.
Yeah.
Let's move into how your experience was through the restoration process from beginning to end.
Okay.
How was the process for you?
Oh, my brother Alan and I spent almost the entire time of the restoration on the site. We had so much fun. We really tried hard to stay out of the way, but I think there were a couple of close calls with the bulldozer. But we were riding around in his Ranger. But it worked out to have us close because we were there to answer questions and ask questions and tweak things a little bit. And it was fun for us to be there. The entire process, I really felt went smoothly from your first call, Karen, when you presented the idea all the way through completion. You took care of the funding requests, the permits, bids, securing contractors. You explained the forms and had them ready for me to sign. You kept me informed at every stage of the process. And any delay that happened was on my end as I was dealing with Dan's death. I think there was a while that I didn't get paperwork back to you. I think maybe go to the next slide too.
Yeah, we've got quite a few, so you can move through those, Terry.
I felt that the process was fluid too, because we started with a proposed plan, but then we tweaked it a little bit, and I shared a few ideas, and Karen and the contractors explained to me whether that was feasible, and sometimes they offered ideas for me to consider. We all seem to communicate really well together, and I think we ended up with a better result than we had even anticipated. I had asked to have it seeded as a pollinator habitat so we could attract and support wildlife. And I was thrilled to learn that it would help remove nitrates from the water and that it would help protect endangered species.
Camille, tell us a little bit about the benefits that you're seeing from this restoration already.
In August, my 7-year-old granddaughter, Ayana, came for a week-long visit. And I told her that we were going to go on an adventure. We fixed a picnic lunch and went down to the Oxbow. We had no rain. So both of the Oxbow sections were dry. And so Ayana was able to explore those beds and she found beautiful rocks. We had pockets full of rocks. And we discovered animal tracks and snails. We watched butterflies and birds. There were over 50 goldfinches down there while we were having our day. The eagles were soaring above our heads. We told stories and we sang songs. And when it was time for us to leave, Ayana said, "Grandma, this has been the best day of my life." And it brought to mind my dad's words about the legacy that we leave for those who follow us. Those are some of the animal tracks. The circled green area, that was an eagle that was flying over the trees. And I told Karen, I tried to catch a picture of the frogs that were down in the Oxbow, but I couldn't, but I found this little toad. So he got his picture taken.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Camille.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's
I
fantastic.
think, you know, any negatives didn't have anything to do with the Oxbow project. I think the drought played a role. You know, we didn't have rain for almost a month after it had been seeded. And so the seeds struggled to germinate. And then also there's a nitrate issue that became even more apparent this year. There's a new pork production plant just 2 miles south. And a new water treatment plant was built in town, which is 2 miles north, to accommodate the increased demand. The creek that runs the entire length of this farm is used as a drainage ditch from the water treatment plant and flows into the Boone River. This year, both of the facilities were fined because of the high nitrate levels. They have since both corrected their practices, but the Oxbows along this area will help to improve the water quality. And I feel like the restored Oxbow ended up feeling like a perfect little part of heaven. I can walk there daily. I can envision a spot for a picnic table or a bench. I can make memories with my granddaughter or other family. The legacy that my parents passed on continues. But mostly I have peace of mind knowing that wildlife and nature will benefit, and it simply was the right thing to do. So I want to thank Karen and Derek and Brandon and our contractors and the donors who helped make this possible.
I'm excited, Camille, because I still haven't been back since it's been restored. I was there with Karen to survey it, but I think just Karen and Brandon were there to see it after restoration. So I'm excited. Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
I thought we would just kind of, come back big picture from there and what's happening on the landscape and why we're excited about the momentum that's being built. As Karen mentioned, restoration in Iowa has been in process since basically 2001 in multiple watersheds in Iowa. We've got the 3 primary ones for Topeka Shiner, and these are some of the folks in both Iowa and Minnesota, Alicia Kenny and Scott Relson, who've done a lot of Oxbow restorations over the years. And so that momentum that they started is really what we're building on and continuing to do and get out there in these watersheds, but certainly far beyond that as well. So just, real quick on our successes, we've got hundreds of landowners that we've worked with. Camille's an amazing one and many others as well. So as you heard, so much of Iowa is private land. This is a perfect practice that we've been able to work with landowners on. We've got 56 species of fish that have been identified in these Oxbows in Iowa. In Iowa alone, here's a little figure showing how Oxbow restorations have kind of accumulated over the years since 2001. The white is new restorations, the black is cumulative. But Minnesota's also done well over 100 Oxbows in a relatively short period of time under Scott Ralston and a grant that they had there. And that, again, most of those are on private lands as well. And we're seeing excellent occupancy rates from Topeka Shiner, which is a good positive for some of our funding sources. But it's bigger than that. The birds, many birds are using Oxbows. It's actually, I think, 81 species that we have documented for using Oxbows. 9 of those probably would not be there had the Oxbow not been restored based on the research that's been done. And the water quality piece is, again, a big driver in Iowa. On average, we see 42% nitrate reduction after an Oxbow is restored. It can be 90% or even greater if we have the floodwater storage and retention time. And so because of that, and a lot of Karen and Iowa Soybeans work getting this in front of the state committees, it's actually now an accepted nutrient reduction strategy practice with statewide funding in Iowa, specifically for water quality. So it's far bigger than just Fish and Wildlife. And to that point, TNC and others, a lot of the cities and municipalities are actually doing Oxbow restorations for flood mitigation. So again, the multi-purposeness of these Oxbows is incredible. And a lot of times, you know, all these benefits can accumulate at a single site where that's feasible.
Yeah, so kind of our partnerships, like Derek said earlier, we've been working together, Iowa Soybean, TNC, US Fish and Wildlife for 20 years now. We've been working with Iowa Department of Natural, or IDALS, Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, hundreds of farmers, like Derek said, NRCS, DNR, universities, just the list goes on, a bunch of private partners as well, Syngenta, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, so just far reaching.
I want to share a quick success story on how our partnership is being scaled up to a statewide level. And so, you know, with the addition of this to the nutrient reduction strategy, additional funding, we identified a gap that we need more technical service providers doing these on the landscape, because for a while it was kind of just the 3 of us and maybe a handful of others across the state. And so we really needed to get this training into the masses. And so we developed an Oxbow restoration toolkit with all the partners logos down below to do a step-by-step guide on how to restore Oxbows for conservation professionals. We also just are wrapping up a training for conservation professionals across the state of Iowa. At the end of this, over 100 professionals will be trained, and over 500 reached through the toolkit to get more of these on the landscape and really scale up this practice.
And just to add on there, Karen, I mean, this is, you know, anyone can download this. You know, it is built specific to Iowa with tools that are mentioned, but the practice itself, again, is far more reaching than Iowa. And Karen and I and Brandon often get questions from other states and folks working on these elsewhere as well.
Yeah, so these are some of the, we wanted to highlight some of our focus areas. Like we said, me and Derek are very focused on the Topeka Shiner. Karen has a little bit more flexibility and can go outside of these areas, but we're mainly focused on the Boone River watershed, the Topeka, or the North Raccoon River watershed, and then the Rock Island watershed as well. So there's actually new funding with the RCPP on the North Raccoon, but we can talk about that probably on the next slide. Yeah, so the future, like Derek said, it's part of the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. That brings in way more funding statewide. All we have to do is reroute a little bit of tile to the Oxbow. The RCPPs will be able to restore 35 additional Oxbows in those specific watersheds with 100% funding. Derek said 40,000 Oxbows and off-channel wetlands on the landscape, and just in these watersheds, there's thousands. So, and the more interest and popularity we're gathering, the more of these we can do with other professionals and landowners. There are some challenges to this project. You do have logistics like permitting is always a issue. Just working through that process. We're working to get it more streamlined and working to get it faster. Flooding, I mean, we can't change Mother Nature, so we'll be digging a hole and water will flow into it, and that's never great. So, and then there's just different design standards. NRCS has their own, Topeka Shiner has its own. To put reroute tile in, it has its own design standard. So just a little bit of challenges. Communication is key. I'm pretty new. I just started recently, but just communicating with Derek and Karen, they're awesome. Though they've walked me through every step of the way on Oxbow restoration. So, and then just the landowner interest. There are a ton of these. So 10%, there's still a lot of Oxbows we can restore, but we're hoping to get this practice out there more and basically use it as an edge of field practice right alongside bioreactors and saturated buffers.
And so, we just kind of wanted to end with, we focus on Iowa and we've made some pretty big progress here, but there's a lot left to do, of course. And the last Brandon slide was kind of our, some of our funding is limited to certain watersheds, some of it statewide. And so we're just working through those challenges and opportunities to get more of these on the landscape. But, again, this is far bigger than just Iowa. And we do think it has a great opportunity to pick up steam in other states, Oklahoma, Oregon. There's been a couple of states that have really jumped on already. It's actually being done in Sweden. So other countries are doing quite a bit of this as well. So just hope that folks will get to thinking about, what the river looks like. Is there opportunities for this type of thing in your states as well? And then, we are a resource. We're happy to help, provide insider guidance, and certainly you can access our toolkit as well and figure out if there's any, overlap. There's good things that you could use from there. So with that, I guess we will go to questions. And I just want to thank the presenters and especially Camille, who I think unfortunately dropped off, but thank you all for helping out with this presentation.
Yes, thank you to the panel, and a lot of thanks going out to Camille in chat for sharing her love of the land and love of family, and how personal this project and this whole experience has been to her. I've touched a lot of folks. I do have a couple of questions. Going to move the ones that have been upvoted to the top. One from Mark Roberts. Is there a rule of thumb for the depth of excavation in the Oxbow versus bankfull elevation of the existing contributing stream or releasing stream?
Yeah, that's a great question. In Iowa here, and from our experience, I guess I will say in most cases, in my mind, that comes down to your objectives. And so, for us, when we're digging out the sediment, we're often digging it down to the historic stream bed. And then the next, that function of how it connects to the stream, it could be enhanced. It could be an actual connection channel that we'll excavate to make sure we got that right height and depth. Or if it's an active channel, a very active channel. For Topeka Shiner, we like them to connect every 1 to 2 years at least, if not more frequently. If they connect regularly, we might just leave it as is and just excavate out that sediment down to that historic stream depth.
Great. I think we got time for one more question. This is from Aline Morrow. Any best practices that can be shared on how to get larger business partners involved? Example, Coca-Cola.
I'll leave that to Karen because she's done an amazing job. Grant.
Well, it's the higher ups at TNC that do a great job, but I will say, so many of these corporations, especially now, are having more goals around environmental goals. And so it doesn't hurt to reach out. Yeah. And just ask. And a lot of them, if they're local, like for instance, we have Microsoft in Des Moines in Iowa, and they're interested in upstream practices that they can support. And so they're supporting 10 Oxbow restorations over the next couple of years. So it just doesn't hurt to ask. They do have goals and they're looking for partners to help them get on the ground restorations. So.
And I do think we've got time for this last question. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, and this one, I know we talked. You talked about Oxbow restoration is contributing positive to water quality, and the question here from Salem is, how are you keeping the Oxbows from being polluted from when they're grazed by cattle?
Yeah, so our research through Iowa State University and many others on water quality suggests that there is no incompatibility there. I guess, and we haven't seen that from a wildlife perspective or from water quality. We're using these oxbows oftentimes as kind of that dual function wetland treatment, nutrient reduction approach, as well as the wildlife side or the flood storage side. What I will say is, oftentimes we do want to establish vegetation after restoration. Of course, we might do a little buffering with fencing if that's open, the landowner's open to that. But we also really prefer cattle to be watering off creek in most cases, as opposed to otherwise they're right down in the creek in most cases. So.
Great, thank you. And thanks again to the panel and particularly to Camille for making the time and sharing as deeply as you did. Thank you so much. Well, we're gonna wrap it up here in just a second. We do have a social time that at a separate link that will be shared in the separate Zoom link that will be shared in the chat. If you can join us for that, we'd love to see and visit a little bit more free form. And also don't forget that we'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 Eastern time. Time zone corrections up to you wherever you happen to be. I'm going to throw it over to Partnerscape's chairman Jim Stone for a closing. But thanks to everybody that attended, and thanks to all the panelists from me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. And wow, if that is an impactful afternoon, folks, that's again, as we've said numerous times today, it's too bad we aren't doing this in person. But boy, it doesn't matter where you go across this country. There's wonderful stories right there. And, unfortunately, we don't see that in the press every day. I wish we did, but it just reestablishes how important what Partnerscapes and what all of you do in your daily lives. And this idea that we can be respectful and partner up and neighbor up is just infectious, and you can see it happening across the country. So just applaud all of you for taking the time, and we were all the beneficiaries of that, just to hear wonderful stories. And I do want to thank Steve. None of this stuff gets done without great leadership from our side, and it sure isn't me. It's a amazing board of directors, and Steve just does a superb job in keeping us organized. And we weren't sure we should have done this, and we sort of laid this all on Steve's shoulders and a little bit with Cindy, obviously, but they really jumped up. And again, a huge thanks to our partners in Oregon for allowing us to come into your living room, if you will. And we'll look forward to tomorrow. I hope most of you can come back. Going to be some great presentations, and as most of you know me, we want to have some good conversations at the social hour. That's where we get a lot of the stuff done, and hope you'll come just share some experiences from your summer or things that are important to you, and we'll have a little bit of fun doing it. And we'll just hang out for an hour or so, and when everybody gets tired, we'll just join in tomorrow. So thanks you all for being here today, and look forward to the next hour, and sure come back tomorrow. So thanks, Steve.